So now let me introduce our next speaker. Is Mr. Artur Coimbra de Oliveira. He is a board director at ANATEL. Artur Coimbra holds bachelor's and master's degree in law from Brasilia University, an MBA in business management from Fundação Getúlio Vargas. He has been a federal attorney since 2007. Previously, he had been a regulation specialist at ANATEL, worked as advisor at ANATEL's specialized federal attorney and at Republic Presidency. He was director of broadband at the Ministry of Communications and Secretary of Telecommunications from 2011 to 2022. During this period, he took part in the National Broadband Program Formulating Group, chaired the Steering Committee of Strategic Communications, and Defense Geostationary Satellite Project. And he was a member of ANATEL's advisory board. So we are very glad to have Mr. Coimbra with us today. ANATEL has been a key partner and a very innovative regulator. Indeed, it was recognized with the Leadership DSA Awards in the past. And we have been really seeing a lot of activity from their team. They have a great team with technical experts, and we really look forward to hear from him about the last advancements in Brazil. So welcome.
Okay. So good morning. Yes, ANATEL has great and unquiet engineers that really thrive into trying to discover and invent new things. So it's very good to have this team. I have here Iroa from my team who's joined me this trip. And I just like to make a brief presentation about what ANATEL has been doing in terms of spectrum. Not only spectrum sharing, but spectrum in general. Well, at first, let's talk a little bit about Wi-Fi 6. We regulated that 1200 megahertz for Wi-Fi 6 about 2 years ago, and 1.5 years ago, we issued technical specification for that, considering it to be a very low power applications, mainly for indoor use. The thing is that we've been thinking about possibilities of expanding it for outdoor applications. And so we really like to raise that subject, whether we can discuss an increase on the power of those equipment. Of course, we are limited by international standards and, well, equipment standards that have been developed with lower power, but it's something we really like to discuss. For Brazil, it's very important to have this technology being used in the outdoor environment. So that would allow a lot of small cells and allow the population to have a more straightforward access to the internet. The thing is, as I said, as I usually say, we have less than 100 devices certified and homologated at ANATEL, and that means that it's not really available for the population. I mean, most of these 83 devices are smartphones. A few of them are routers, but we hope that in the next years it gets more and more popular within the Brazilian population. Now, white spaces. White spaces are very important for Brazil. We already regulated that issue about 1 year ago. The thing is that Brazil has a great rural area. More than 90% of its territory is rural area. And great distance, we really need to use low radio frequency bands to cover all that. And well, we don't have TV in this rural area. People often watch TV through satellite, TVRO, and so it will be a great achievement if we could use the VHF band or the UHF band to provide internet access. Of course, we think about something more on the side, as Mario said, on the dynamic white space use. So ANATEL has all the infrastructure necessary to deploy it. We haven't deployed that system yet, but we will as soon as it comes up as a potential issue, because we do not have yet in Brazil any certified devices for white spaces. We know that some companies are already developing it or even showcasing some demos for white spaces, but it's not the case in Brazil. That would be a very good idea if we could show the society how it can help people to access internet in the rural areas, if we could bring it to Brazil, but that's not the case yet, so we're still waiting for the opportunity to make it work. Unfortunately, it's not the case yet. We recently made our 5G auction, and it was the biggest auction, radio frequency auction in the world in terms of volume of spectrum, quantity of spectrum, and the biggest radio frequency auction in the history of Latin America in terms of value. It's about $9 billion, of which 95% was converted into investments, network investments. So we're talking about covering all federal highways and roads in Brazil, serving every one of the 5,500 municipalities in Brazil with 5G standalone until 2029, covering every one of the 10,000 rural villages in Brazil with at least 4G, covering the Amazon with under riverbed cables, covering the deploying a specific network for the government on the 700 megahertz for something like the first net that the United States has, and also covering almost every municipality in Brazil with a backhaul of fiber. So there's a lot of investment that's coming up in the next years. Specifically regarding fiber, we are really approaching, as I said, every municipality in Brazil. We have today 893 municipalities that still do not have fiber, and we're going to really come very close to every one of them with fiber until 2030. Of course, there are municipalities that, especially in the Amazon, that still need satellite. Technically, it's not feasible to serve them with fiber. Therefore, we also invest in satellite. We have a geostationary satellite in K-band support that covers the whole country. But also, we are very excited about LEOs, constellations that can bring more capacity and a lower latency, especially for backhaul applications, and allowing 5G to come into the, not only 5G, but also Wi-Fi 6 to come to the inner Amazon. So we are betting very much on that. So data traffic has been growing a lot in Brazil. That's no news. It's been happening all over the world. And as we have our are great challenges to come close to the areas that do not have access yet. So after the 5G auction, we managed to serve much of our digital divide, but our next steps are especially rural areas, dispersed rural areas, because we will be covering 10,000 rural villages, but we have 20 million people living in rural areas. I mean, they are spread. And that's our next challenge. That's why this discussion at DSA is so important for us to bring new technologies that allow that kind of applications. And we also have the problem regarding accessibility, affordability, let's put it that way. Have a great chunk of the population that has already coverage, so we already bridged the digital divide in terms of supply, but we haven't done it in terms of demand. So population have access to the network virtually, but a lot of people have no money to pay for it. So we designed the program to pay a part of the bill of low-income population, that low-income families with students that are teenagers or children. This program is going to start in October, so next month, and let's see the results of that. I mean, for these families to have internet access, we hope that they can have more access to educational and economic opportunities with that. And we also have our universal service fund. You know, ITU a few years ago made an assessment of international use of universal service funds, and well, more than about 60% of the countries did not use their funds, and Brazil was one of them. Although we have collected $5 billion in the last 20 years, not one penny was used for its purpose. The money was collected for other uses. And recently we managed to review our legislation last year, and this year will be the first year that we're really going to use the money for its purpose. So to start doing projects to come to the rural areas and to pay to subsidize the low-income population. So this will be a very important year in Brazil in terms of universal services. And this is my last slide regarding community networks and rural areas in private networks. So in terms of community networks, you know that this is something, this is a solution that seems to be very suitable to many places. In Brazil, we don't see much of community networks, so nobody really knows what's a community network, or what a community network is. In Brazil, we have that phenomenon of regional providers. They are companies, small businesses that support their community, and they deploy their networks and work as a business. We have something like 19,000 small providers around the country. But if you try to find out whether we have a classical community network, which is a community-led, non-profit network, you'll find around 60 or 70 of them in Brazil. And they're not much at all. And this is the result of a recent study that was made in Brazil. And so they really studied and investigated and found out only 63 community networks. They cost around $12 a month to their operational costs. So they can be used, but the problem is that community networks in Brazil, when they are deployed, they soon face bifurcation. Whether they die whether they evolve to be a provider. So eventually, a community network is the first step in Brazil to subsequent evolution. So it's very hard for Brazil to use community networks as a great solution, but it's an important step to test some markets and see whether it is feasible or not to support it with private operation. Now, my last point, in terms of rural areas, I have some things to say about that. Today in Brazil, we're still trying to find a solution for covering with spectrum effectively the rural areas. I mean, we first tried in 2012 when we made an auction for the 4G at the 2.5 gigahertz, and we attached to the 2500 megahertz, we attached the 450 megahertz band. And we put some obligations for the operators that won the auction to cover rural areas. Well, 10 years after that, nothing happened. The operators said that there was no equipment, there was no devices, user devices or affordable devices, and it just didn't run. I mean, we made that 10 years ago, inspired by some cases of Sweden, Russia, Norway, I believe, and that they already used that band for broadband, rural broadband. But somehow it didn't work in Brazil, so we'll be getting this band, radio frequency band back, and going to re-auction it for any other purpose if eventually there's interest in it. Today, we also see that the 250 megahertz band is very much used in rural applications, but that works mostly for IoT. And in Brazil, it's really been an important band for rural applications, for automatization of the harvest, or if you want to monitor your cattle or your cows. So it works very well, but the band is not so large. The bandwidth is not so large, so it's not a solution that may work for every application. That's mainly for IoT. We have the 700 megahertz, 800 megahertz, and 900 megahertz auction, but obviously these are explored mainly in the biggest cities or in cities in Brazil. So we've been creating a policy for secondary use to allow providers and other companies to use it where this band is not being explored. But this has not been as strong as needed. I mean, we have not been able to attract new players with the framework we have. I mean, of course, our first legislation about that, regulation about that, was that, well, you enter as a secondary player, and if the primary player wants to use it, you just have to go out. So nobody was willing to invest in that situation. I mean, I'm going to invest in my network, and on the other day I have to leave because the primary company saw that there's a potential market and just steal that market from me. So we reviewed that regulation to indicate that that should be a negotiation between the primary user and the secondary user on that moment. The primary user cannot simply just enter and sweep the secondary user out of the market. It still hasn't been as strong as it wanted, because it raised a lot of questions about how would that negotiation work. I mean, the secondary user mostly do not have as much money as the primary user, so will be in a delicate position on this negotiation. So we're reviewing one more time this regulation to put a window, like a 5 or 10-year window for the secondary user to explore it, free from interference. I mean, we have some radio frequency bands in Brazil that have been auctioned more than 20 years ago and haven't been used yet in some rural areas. So why not allow it to be used by anyone who wants to deploy their network and allow them 5 or 10 years of free exploration at least. So that's a set of questions we've been discussing, and specifically for 5G 3700 to 3800 megahertz, we dedicated that band, that 100 megahertz, we dedicated it to private networks. And we are running today a grant process through Polygon. So we have, you ask for the frequency to be used in a specific polygon, you get the license. It's a secondary use license, but we're not be giving that license to anyone else. So you use that license as a virtual primary user, and you deploy your own network for your own use. So there was a great excitement about private networks in Brazil a few years back. Many companies said that they would deploy their own networks for 5G, and as soon as they started to make all the calculations to see how much it would cost, so 90% of the excitement reduced to 10%. But still, a lot of big companies in Brazil are interested in doing that, and we hope that it can work as not only as an industrial application, but also as a means of accessibility for the population too. So thank you very much. I remain here to talk with you throughout the event. Thank you.